Humans are the strangest creatures on the planet. For thousands of years, we have constantly conquered nature, leaving behind structures that are both magnificent and deadly. And we're far from finished. But why are we willing to gamble our very lives just to build in places never meant for human survival? Perched on sheer cliffs, hovering over 1,000-foot abysses, or right beneath a mass of water capable of erasing an entire city. And out of them all, what is truly the most dangerous structure ever built? The answer awaits at the end of this video, and it's not an ancient ruin. It is standing right now, quietly waiting for a day that has yet to come. To build this bridge, engineers faced a problem that looked at first unsolvable. A river gorge in the mountains of Hubei province. The two cliff faces stood more than a kilometer apart, walls of rock falling away at 75, 80, 90 degrees, choked with dense forest. There was no crane long enough. No conventional way to carry the first cable across the void. And without that first thin line, there could be no bridge at all. So they reached for something no one had ever used before. They fired a rocket. On the 9th of October 2006, rockets carried a pair of guidelines streaking across the canyon. The first time in history this method had ever been used to build a suspension bridge. From that single fragile thread, they pulled across heavier cables, and heavier ones still, until they had strung an entire roadway across the sky. When it opened, the deck stood nearly 500 meters above the river below. Today, traffic crosses the Siduhe Bridge like any ordinary stretch of highway. Most drivers never realize they are floating at a height that would give a helicopter pause, suspended over nothing but air, on cables that were once delivered by a rocket. But if Siduhe conquered depth, the next structure defied height itself. It climbs so high, it passes straight through the clouds. There is a bridge in the south of France, where drivers quite often cannot see the ground beneath them. Not because of fog rising from the valley, but because they are driving above the clouds. At its highest point, measured from the base of the pier to the tip of the mast crowning it, the Millau Viaduct reaches 343 meters. That is roughly 19 meters taller than the Eiffel Tower. The tallest pier alone stands 245 meters high, the tallest bridge pier ever built. And to hold a roadway weighing tens of thousands of tons on columns this slender, every dimension had to be calculated down to the millimeter. On misty mornings, the feet of the bridge vanish into a white sea, and the deck seems to drift above it, a ribbon of road leading into the sky. The Millau Viaduct is more than a bridge. It is proof that human beings can take a valley that was never meant to be crossed and turn it into a horizon. If Millau reached for the sky, the next feat went the opposite way entirely, down to the bottom of the sea. How do you connect two islands separated by a strait too deep and too violent with storms to ever bridge? Japan's answer was simple and audacious. If you cannot go over it, go under it. They dug a tunnel more than 53 kilometers long, its deepest point lying 240 meters beneath the surface of the sea. But the ocean did not surrender easily. Groundwater poured in again and again. In one flood in 1976, seawater broke into the works and took more than 2 months to seal. The digging stretched on for almost 2 decades, and 34 workers lost their lives to cave-ins, to flooding, to the accidents. Today, trains slip through the Seikan tunnel in near silence. The passengers inside can barely sense that above their heads presses the full, crushing weight of the sea. These structures were vast and solid and heavy. The next one is the opposite, so fragile, you'll wonder why anyone dared to step onto it at all. Picture a bridge nearly half a kilometer long, but no wider than the length of your own foot. Strung between 2 mountainsides, with nothing holding it up in the middle. No pillar, no support, nothing. "494 meters long, 65 centimeters wide, hanging as much as 85 meters above the ravine below. And the floor beneath your feet is a transparent steel mesh. So when you look down, you look straight through it, all the way to the bottom. There is nothing between you and the drop but a steel cable, and your faith in the people who built it. And yet, it is perfectly, provably safe. That is the paradox. The thing that looks the most terrifying was, in truth, the most precisely engineered. Which is exactly what makes the next structures so unsettling. Because these ones look solid, and they stand in ways that, by rights, they simply should not. There is a tower that has been leaning for nearly 850 years and has never fallen. And the real question is not why it leans, it's why it hasn't collapsed. The tower rises almost 57 meters and weighs somewhere around 14,500 tons, yet its foundation reaches barely 3 meters into the ground, soft, weak, unstable soil. It began to tilt while it was still being built, as workers laid the second floor, and by the early 1990s, the lean had crossed into dangerous territory. The tower was closed for over a decade. Then the engineers did something that sounds almost absurd. They stacked around 600 tons of lead against the northern side as a counterweight, and slowly, carefully, began siphoning soil out from underneath. They did not straighten it. They only pulled it back, just enough to buy it another few centuries. The Leaning Tower of Pisa does not stand in spite of its tilt. It is famous because of it. Pisa leans because the earth beneath it betrayed the builders. But some structures were placed deliberately where there was no solid ground to stand on at all. More than 2,700 meters up, clinging to sheer rock, sit structures built where there isn't even room to plant both feet. Who builds in a place like this, and why? In Switzerland, the Cabane de Bertol perches above 3,300 meters. To reach it, you climb a system of steel ladders bolted directly into the cliff face. But the colder story belongs to the Dolomites, to a small stone shelter called Buffa di Perrero. It was carved directly into a vertical wall of rock 2,760 meters up by Italian soldiers during the First World War, a hidden outpost built to shelter men fighting the Austrians between 1915 and 1918. Its position is so remote, so impossibly placed, that it has earned a nickname, the loneliest house in the world. Imagine living inside that box of stone, the cold, the snow, the artillery, the wind screaming off the peaks. For those soldiers, a shelter clinging to a cliff was the thin line between surviving the night and not. A century later, it still grips the rock, a fragment of a war frozen against the mountain. On a mountain, at least, there is rock to hold on to. The next structure stands utterly alone, surrounded on every side by the sea. At the mouth of the harbor on the Greek island of Andros stands a lighthouse that sits on no coastline and on no island. It rises instead from the top of a single solitary spire of rock, jutting straight up out of the water. That rock was shaped over thousands of years of erosion into a natural pedestal, as if the sea itself had carved a plinth and waited. The first lighthouse was raised upon it in 1897. It is the only lighthouse in Greece to stand out on a wave-swept rock like this, taking the full force of the open water. German bombs destroyed it during the Second World War. And it might have stayed a ruin, but decades later, in the 1990s, a shipping magnate paid to rebuild it, stone for stone, in memory of his daughter who had died. The new tower became the first automated lighthouse in all of Greece. No keeper lives inside. The only way to reach it is a flight of steps carved into the rock, and only when the sea allows. And so it stands there, flashing through the dark entirely alone, as if to prove that not even a spire of stone besieged by the waves lies beyond our reach. Tourlitis is barely more than a century old. The next structure has clung to its cliff for 1,500 years, and to this day, most people misunderstand what is holding it up. There is a temple fixed to the face of a vertical cliff, dozens of meters above the ground, that has survived for more than 1,500 years. Beneath it runs a row of slim wooden poles, so delicate they look ready to snap. But here is the secret. Those poles are barely holding anything at all. The true weight of the temple rests on 27 horizontal wooden beams, driven deep into the heart of the rock. The ancient builders chiseled holes into the cliff, drove the beams inside, and locked them with wedges, so that the deeper the wedge bit in, the more the beam expanded and gripped the stone. The same principle as a modern expansion bolt 1,000 years early. As one Chinese expert in ancient architecture put it, if those beams were as short as people assume, the whole structure would have tumbled into the gorge long ago. The hanging temple has outlasted most of the nations on Earth. A quiet reminder that our instincts about what should fall and what should stand can be completely, utterly wrong. Until now, every structure has been safer than it looked. From here on, that reverses. These next ones look solid, and that is exactly what makes them frightening. There is a structure so large that it alters the planet itself. And that is not a metaphor. The Three Gorges Dam stretches 2,335 meters across the Yangtze River, stands 185 meters tall, and holds back as much as 40 billion cubic meters of water. According to calculations by Dr. Benjamin Fong Chao, a geophysicist at NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center, that colossal mass of water shifts the Earth's axis by about 2 centimeters and lengthens each of our days by 6/100ths of a microsecond. A number so small it is almost invisible, and yet measurable. All of that force bears down on a single wall of concrete and on the geology beneath it. The Three Gorges Dam is a monument to absolute ambition, powerful enough to nudge our very sense of what human beings are capable of. And it raises a question we rarely have to ask on this scale. What happens on the day it can no longer hold? Three Gorges holds the water back. The next dam was built for the opposite purpose, to unleash a flood on purpose. Most dams are born to stop floods. But there is one dam that every single year deliberately creates one, and that is the very reason it exists. The Yellow River carries the heaviest load of sediment of any river on Earth. Left alone, that silt settles to the bottom of the reservoir, and steadily raises the riverbed downstream, choking the channel and feeding the risk of catastrophe. So since 2002, each year before the flood season, the gates are opened. A powerful, engineered surge is released, lasting around 20 days, to scour the accumulated sediment out of the reservoir and flush it toward the sea. In a single release in 2018, more than 400 million tons of sediment were driven out of the dam. The water that erupts from those gates runs thick and brown, a wall of liquid earth, both magnificent and violent. Controlled, but barely. This is a dam that must rage on schedule to keep from drowning in its own silt, an annual battle between human hands and the oldest river in China. The most recent release came in the middle of 2026. Every dam you have seen so far is one that people keep under control. The final one is not. It is being held back from collapse every single day by nothing more than human hands. And now, the answer to the question we began with. The most dangerous structure human beings have ever built is not a ruin. It is not a cliffside walkway. It is a dam standing right now in Iraq. The United States Army Corps of Engineers once called it the most dangerous dam in the world, and the reason lies underneath it. Mosul Dam was built on a foundation of gypsum, layers of rock that dissolve in water, which means the very reservoir the dam holds back is slowly, constantly, eating away the ground beneath it, opening hollow voids where solid rock should be. From the day it was inaugurated in 1985, crews have had to pump cement grout down into the foundation without pause. It is an endless act of patching. Stop it for long enough, and this 113-meter dam could sink into a hole in the earth, and if it failed, a wall of water as high as 45 meters could reach the city of Mosul within 2 to 4 hours. More than 500,000 lives at risk. 4 to 6 million people affected, all the way down the Tigris, as far as Baghdad itself. This is why Mosul is the perfect answer. It is not a disaster that has happened. It is a disaster that simply hasn't happened yet. There is still no permanent solution. The grouting remains an obligation that never ends. The dam stands there, calm and immense, its fate resting on a team of people who can never be allowed to stop. Exactly as we promised at the very beginning. A structure standing quietly right now, waiting for a day that has yet to come. And that brings us back to the question we started with. Why do we keep doing this? Why do human beings, again and again, choose to build in the very places that seem to refuse us? On the faces of vertical cliffs, over canyons half a kilometer deep, beneath walls of water heavy enough to shift the planet or to erase a city. The honest answer is that there is no single answer. Some of these structures were acts of worship. Some were acts of desperation, a shelter against the cold, a way home across an impossible strait. Some were pure ambition, the simple refusal to accept that a valley could not be crossed. And a few were mistakes, built on ground that was quietly working against them from the very first day. But look at them all together, and something becomes clear. We are not a species that lives where it is safe. We are a species that builds at the very edge of what is possible, and then leans out a little further just to see if the edge will hold. Most of the time it does. The temple still hangs, the tower still leans, the bridge still sways and holds. But not every edge has been settled. Somewhere in Iraq, at this very moment, a wall of concrete is being held back from the earth by people who are not permitted to stop. A disaster that has not happened, waiting for a day that still might. That is the strange thing about the places we build. Long after the builders are gone, they remain. Standing, quiet, patient, still waiting.